guilty on all counts. Jessica, this is a copy of the verdict sheet right here. It's about 4 pages long. We're still awaiting to hear the verdict for his other 2 co-defendants, Fred Davies, a real estate developer in New Jersey, and Wael Hanna. He's also a businessman from New Jersey. Just again, stunning, guilty on all counts. Robert Menendez, first senator to be charged with a public official acting as a foreign agent. You know, some of those charges: conspiracy to commit bribery, conspiracy to commit honest services wire fraud, bribery, actions to benefit Wael Hanna and Egypt. You know, it's interesting. The jury sent a total of about 4 notes since they began deliberations on Friday. Friday, they just wanted a charger for the laptop. Yesterday, the very first note they sent was they asked whether a not guilty verdict on a single count needed to be unanimous. The judge told them, of course, you need to be unanimous on all counts for all 3 defendants. It was hard to tell which defendant they might be talking about and which count. Again, we're waiting to hear the verdict for his other 2 defendants. We know Senator Bob Menendez has been found guilty on all counts by this jury. One of the other notes they sent yesterday, they just wanted to go outside and get some fresh air. The third note, they did want clarification on counts 11 through 12, and those counts, I want to read them to you. It sounds like they needed some help with bribery, actions to benefit Fred Davies and Qatar. Fred Davies, a businessman, a real estate developer out of New Jersey. You know, it was alleged that Davies gave Menendez and his then-girlfriend, now wife, gold bars and cash in exchange for his political power. They say that Menendez intervened in a criminal prosecution against Davies, and that he also introduced Davies to a member of the royal family in Qatar, who then invested in his real estate project. Menendez, his attorney, this whole time has been saying there is no direct link to any alleged bribes. They have nothing. This is just a big story the prosecution made up. Prosecutors were saying, just look at the hundreds of text messages. Look at all of the emails. That is what they were telling the jury. This is a jury of 6 men, 6 women, very diverse. They range in age from about 27 years old to 68 years old. My colleague Lisa Rosner is standing at the side back entrance, hoping to speak with some of the jurors and make some more sense of the notes they sent. You know, they've been deliberating. They deliberated for a total of roughly 13 hours. Again, that ended today. Before 1 o'clock, they said they had a verdict, they had their lunch, and then they came in and said, yes, we have that verdict. It was read a short time ago. Again, I'm told by reporters in the courtroom that Senator Bob Menendez had no reaction. We know that he stepped down as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We know that fellow senators asked him to step down. He rebuffed that. He stayed in office, and even if he is sentenced and serving time in prison, he could still serve as senator, but he could also be expelled by other members. So we're waiting to see what happens with that. We know that his attorneys have indicated that should things not go their way, they were intending to appeal. My colleague Christine Sloan has been in the courtroom pretty much every day of this trial, so she's going to come join me as soon as she gets out of the courtroom. She has a wealth of knowledge. She's been covering Senator Menendez for years. He's stopped to talk to her a few times outside of the courthouse. Again, behind me, that is the front door. You can see members of the media and press and cameras gathered out there. We're waiting to see if any of the defendants will come outside and will in fact speak. Jessica?
Attorneys called it cherry-picked nonsense, of course. They were sort of defending, saying everything that he did was within the scope of being a sitting U.S. senator. And as you mentioned, Alice, he can still run. He wants to run as an independent. So let's see what happened. You and I have covered a lot of these cases. The jury can deliberate anywhere from a couple of hours to, a couple of weeks. They sent down notes that you mentioned earlier. What did that tell you when they asked the note about sort of all being of the same mind on the one charge?
Yeah, it's interesting, that note they sent, that first note that was yesterday morning, came in just after 11 a.m. It asked whether a not guilty verdict on a single count needed to be unanimous. Now, of course, again, there's 3 defendants in this case. We didn't know which count they were talking about, nor did we know which defendant they were referring to. This is a 4-page verdict sheet. There are 18 counts total. Senator Menendez charged with 16 of those counts. So it appeared they were stuck at least on one count. Maybe one person had doubt, maybe more than one person. But again, I'm still waiting to find out what the verdict was, in fact, for Wael Hanna and Fred Davies. Maybe that will shed some more light on that note. Jessica?
All right, Alice Gaynor, thank you.
This is breaking news.
Good afternoon. I'm Jessica Moore. We are back with more in the breaking news. The trial of Senator Bob Menendez after more than 9 weeks of testimony. He has just been found guilty by a jury of his peers on charges that he accepted lavish bribes in exchange for official acts. This is a major verdict, unprecedented for a sitting senator. Menendez's home was raided back in June of 2022. The FBI uncovering $480,000 in cash stuffed in envelopes and hidden inside closets. The senator faced bribery, extortion charges. He was accused of acting as a foreign agent to benefit the governments of Qatar and Egypt. Sentencing has yet to be announced. Let's get back out to Alice Gaynor. Alice is outside the federal courthouse. Alice, we were just talking on the stream a few minutes ago about sort of the inner workings of this trial. I know that it's a lot to ask you to do this again, but can you walk us through some of the jury questions that they had? Talk to me a little bit about what Bob Menendez's demeanor was when that verdict was handed down, from what you're hearing.
Sure, Jessica, and you mentioned sentencing. We just found out it's been scheduled for October 29th. That is per my colleague Lisa Rosner, who is standing at a side back entrance, hoping to speak with some of the jurors once they are released from the federal courthouse. Again, I just want to set the scene behind me. That is the main entrance. You can see all the cameras, all the reporters. We're waiting to see if Senator Bob Menendez exits anytime soon or if his other two defendants exit. They've been speaking to reporters in the morning. They've had pretty positive attitudes. I'm told by reporters in the courtroom when the verdict was read, Senator Bob Menendez had no reaction. So far, the jury deliberated for a total of about 13 hours before this verdict was announced. They got the case late on Friday, deliberated for about 3 hours on Friday. They sent one note asking for a charger for a laptop. The laptop is what they used to view any of the exhibits that were presented in the case. Yesterday, on Monday, the second day of deliberations, the first full day of deliberations, they sent a total of 3 notes. That first note was very interesting, people thought, because they asked whether a not guilty verdict on a single count needed to be unanimous. The judge said, of course, you need to be unanimous on each count and for each defendant, because remember, there are 3 defendants in this case, not just Senator Bob Menendez, but also 2 New Jersey businessmen. We've got Fred Davies, a real estate developer, and Wael Hanna. There's a 3rd businessman involved, Jose Uribe. He pleaded guilty and testified against them at trial. Back to yesterday, the second note the jury sent was requesting some time outside. They just wanted 10 minutes to go out on the terrace on the 8th floor and just breathe some fresh air. The 3rd note sought clarification on counts 11 and 12. Those were bribery counts, and I want to read them to you. It's bribery actions to benefit Fred Davies and Qatar. So basically, it was alleged, and now he's been found guilty, that Davies gave Menendez, his then girlfriend, now wife, gold bars, cash, in exchange for Menendez's political power. They say that Menendez intervened in a criminal prosecution against Davies, and that he also introduced Davies to a member of the royal family in Qatar, and that person then invested in Davies' real estate project. So again, jury deliberations about 12, 13 hours before they reached that verdict. It was read a short time ago. Still waiting to find out what the verdict was for the other 2 defendants, but Senator Robert Menendez guilty on all counts. Jessica?
Compare, in your opinion, Alice, to the trials that you and I have covered with the former president, Donald Trump? I mean, not the same level of political notoriety, but this is a senator who's had that seat since 2006. I can imagine there's some kind of there's a lot of people down there, a lot of interest in this case.
Yes, compared to the former president on trial, not as crowded. The courtroom not as crowded. I was able to go in and out and get a seat. I didn't have to go to an overflow room. I want to talk about the jury makeup for a moment, if I can. 6 men, 6 women, ranging in age from 27 to 68 years old. Very diverse. His demeanor, Senator Menendez, has been, I wouldn't say upbeat, but he's maintained a positive outlook anytime he comes and goes and speaks to reporters who shout questions to him in the morning. He says, he has faith in God. He has faith in the jury. Yesterday he said that the jury notes their questions seemed to indicate this wasn't as simple a case as prosecutors were making it seem to them. From my standpoint, we were not in the jury room. We don't know necessarily what these notes totally mean. To me, it seemed like they were just struggling with, the judge's instructions to them on how exactly to reach the verdict on a specific count. It doesn't necessarily mean they weren't sure how they felt about it. They were just asking very specific questions, clarifications on if this meant this, should they do this.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned 6 men and 6 women. I know during the trial it's hard to get information about the jurors. Hopefully we'll get that as they leave the courthouse. But have you heard anything about the makeup other than just the gender?
So we have Latinos, Latinas on this jury. We have Black Americans. We have white Americans on this jury. Again, it is a very diverse jury. It's a jury that has been paying attention. That is one thing that attorneys have noted. They have been engaged. They have been taking notes. And again, they deliberated for roughly a dozen or so hours.
Yeah, definitely thorough. All right, Alice Gaynor, thank you so much. Let's get some legal analysis on the case now. Joining us is Hofstra Law Professor James Sample. Professor Sample, thank you for the time this afternoon. Prosecutors presented emails, documents, phone records. In your opinion, as you followed this trial, was there a smoking gun in this case, or was it sort of the cumulative effect of all the evidence?
Jessica, it's good to be with you, and I think that the answer is that it was definitely the latter. There were over 1,000 evidentiary exhibits presented over the course of the 2-month trial here, and as Alice's report just indicated, the jurors really deserve an extraordinary amount of credit. When you think about giving up, in essence, 9 weeks during the summer, no less, of your life and your autonomy to listen and to not be able to speak with each other about the case, the one thing that you have in common, until you get to deliberate. They did an extraordinarily thorough job. This was a complex case because it involved multi-pronged conspiracies. It's true, and one of the things that the defense tried to make a significant factor, particularly in its closing arguments, is that there's not one smoking gun, but the prosecution countered that with a very, very compelling story that just because there's not one so-called smoking gun, the cumulative effect of all of that evidence, all of the interactions, and the very, very compelling. I mean, if you're going to do bribery, you might as well go big, right? Go gold bars, go Mercedes-Benz, go $480,000 in cash sewn into your pant pockets and hidden in your closets. The defense tried to point the finger at Nadine Menendez, but remember, we're talking about the third-ranking official, at least at the time that the charges were initially brought, on the Democratic Party side in the United States Senate. So arguing that he's a somewhat clueless dupe who had been, fooled by his girlfriend and now wife was not a particularly compelling argument, although it seemed to be all the defense really had.
Right. No, I think that's a fair assessment. The former senator decided not to take the stand in his own defense, which is a defendant's right, but sometimes it can affect the outcome. Do you think it affected the case?
Well, it's hard to know whether it affected the case. I think that certainly had Senator Menendez taken the stand, he would have opened himself up to a host of other charges, perjury being foremost among them. I mean, we saw this New York, the Southern District of New York, and earlier this summer in the state courts of New York, not far across the way there downtown in Manhattan. We saw with former President Trump. The risks for most defendants, particularly in white-collar cases where the facts are complex and where the questions can come at you blindly, far outweigh the rewards for most defendants in these kinds of cases. I think they made a sound decision. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but from a lawyering standpoint, putting Bob Menendez on the stand would have been extraordinarily risky. I think one of the things that is especially compelling about this case, and I think it offers a kind of teachable moment. In 2017, Senator Menendez faced another corruption trial. That case ended in a hung jury. Hung jury meaning not an acquittal, but effectively, because it was never retried, effectively he got away with it, so to speak. There were jurors in that case who would have voted for a conviction. It was 10-2. Instead of being chastened by that experience, that's a 2017 case. It's 2018, just mere months later, when the fact pattern at issue in this case starts to develop. That is an astounding indication that rather than being chastened, the lack of consequences for earlier actions other than the consequence of having to endure a trial, certainly, he decided to double down.
Right. It almost seemed like he was a bit emboldened, if I'm hearing you right. So Nadine Menendez is being tried separately. As you said, Menendez's defense really tried to pin a lot of this on her. Just a few hours ago, her trial was postponed indefinitely. That was obviously before this verdict came down. What do you make of that?
The timing was certainly an eyebrow raiser. I mean, I don't know, other than the fact that she's being treated for cancer.
Right.
We don't know a whole lot about the precise details, nor should we really know the precise details of her treatments and diagnoses. It was odd timing that order would come down while the jury was deliberating in Senator Menendez's case. However, I think that the safe assumption, it's not as though it's been dismissed. It's been postponed indefinitely. I think the safe assumption here is that the judge is taking some time, offering her some time to deal with the pressing matter of her cancer treatment, and we'll be on a kind of wait and see there. It is odd that postponement occurred while the jury was deliberating, but I don't think we want to read too much into it at this point.
Yeah, interesting timing. All right, Professor James Sample, thank you so much for your expertise. I know it's a busy afternoon. Really appreciate having you with us. All right, we're going to go back out now to CBS News New York reporter Alice Gaynor. She's joined by Christine Sloan, our colleague who has been inside the courtroom for the duration of the trial. Alice and Christine, I'm sure you have a lot of questions for each other out there.
So, Christine, you were in there when the verdict was read. First of all, let's talk about the energy in that room and what was the demeanor of Senator Menendez and also his two co-defendants.
So I've got to tell you, just right before the verdict was read, there was just complete silence for just minutes. And then when the verdict came in, it was off the bat, guilty, guilty, guilty. The senator found guilty, 16 counts. Guilty. His reaction at first was just very stoic. He sat there, he nodded his head, and then he raised his hands to his face. He put his head down, and then he looked at the jury. He said nothing, and the judge had warned everyone, no outbursts whatsoever during the verdict reading. His sister Caridad and his daughter Alicia were also in the courtroom. They were silent, no tears, stoic. That look of dread said absolutely nothing. Wael Hanna, one of the defendants, who was also found guilty on 6 counts, his family sat in the front. They cried very silently. But it was a very extraordinary moment. I have covered the senator for more than 30 years. And he sat there quietly, and when he walked out of the courtroom, I was the first person walking out of the courtroom, and I walked out with him. He nodded his head, and he looked very, very upset.
And we do want to point out that's the door where the senator would be coming out of. We have a camera position there, so if he does give any reaction. I know he's answered your questions before as he's come and gone from the courthouse here.
Yes, you know, he has stopped and talked to me regularly. He always comes to our camera. He says a few words. And, you know, the last words to me were that, you know, I trust the jury. I put it in God's hands and in the jury's hands. And the jury, you know, they ordered lunch very early today, so we knew something was up. They ordered their lunch. I think it was literally 30 minutes. And at 12:32, there was a verdict. The judge called the jury in, 6 men, 6 women, very diverse group of men and women. The jury foreperson, she is an investment banker. She is, from what I believe, Latina. And she read it. You know, she read the verdict. It was guilty, guilty, guilty. And, you know, they had asked questions during the deliberations that led some people to believe that perhaps they were leaning toward a not guilty verdict. But when the guilty verdict started coming in, I think everybody knew, because if the senator was found guilty on count 1, count 2, then he had to be found guilty on the rest of them as well. So these are bribery, conspiracy, extortion, acting as a foreign agent. That's the one thing that I know, having spoken to him, that he's very, very upset about. But actually, the conspiracy and the bribery charges carry more years. So they're going to be back here for sentencing on October 29th. And
what do we know about an appeal? Are they planning to file an appeal?
Yes. So during the trial and during after the summations, and when the jury was asking questions, number of the defense has said they will appeal. and they have until the middle of August to file certain motions. But they made a record of many different things, and the way that the jury at one point had asked about Fred Davies, whether the senator was interfering with his prosecution. And there was a slight question about the wording, and the defense was adamant. It took 1 hour to respond to that question. So they made a record of that. So they are going to appeal this.
Now let's talk about Senator Menendez stepped down as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He did not step down as senator despite repeated calls to do so, and now some of those calls once again coming in. What do you expect to happen now that he has been found guilty on all counts? Do you see him stepping aside and resigning?
I don't see that happening right now. I think we're going to have to wait a couple of days to see what happens. He did stay in this race running as an independent. From what I understand, he has spent about $2 million of the campaign chest, the war chest that he's got. So it's uncertain what he's going to do. Well, unfortunately, he's going to have to step down at some point. But if they appeal, I'm not sure where that process will go.
It sounds like he could be expelled, but even if he's behind bars, he technically could actually still. And we know he filed to run for re-election as an independent. Let's talk about the case itself and what the jury saw in that courtroom. I know that lawyers were saying they were engaged, they were applauding them for this because, again, it is summer. People have vacations and plans and work, and they set that aside. This marks the 10th week, I believe, right?
Well, we're nearly 2 months. So it started May 13th, so we've been 2 months into this. The jury was tired. They were ready to go. And, we thought that verdict was going to come in on Monday after a full day of deliberations. I think they were ready to go. And I think that indication of that early lunch to us was an indication that they were ready with a verdict. And it came very quickly.
What's some of the evidence that the jurors saw during this trial? Because, of course, defense attorneys were saying there was nothing directly linking the senator to these bribes. So what is it that jurors saw? We know prosecutors said there was a trail of hundreds of emails and text messages. So if you could explain just some of the exhibits.
So, what I want to tell you is the defense in its summation. The one thing that really stood out was there was no email, no text message, no audio. They said linking the senator to actually, extorting this money. Yeah, there was no quid pro quo. But what they did see was a lot of gold bars and a lot of cash stuffed in envelopes. And I think from the questions that were being asked, Fred Davies, the defendant who was also, he was found guilty. Yes, he was found guilty on 7 of the counts, all counts. His fingerprints were on an envelope that was in the senator's jacket in the basement. Now, the senator's defense had said that all of the cash was found in his wife Nadine's locked closet that he had no key to. But the prosecution said, hey, wait a minute. Nadine Menendez's fingerprints were not on any of those envelopes. They were all Fred Davies' fingerprints, including the envelope that was in the senator's jacket in the basement. So that, to me, really stood out. They had questions about Fred Davies, and the fingerprints were one thing. And there were most of those text messages were between Nadine Menendez and Wael Hana, the other businessman who had a monopoly. Yes, born in Egypt. He had a monopoly on a halal business with the government of Egypt. The text messages mostly between the two of them. However, there were some significant text messages from the senator to Nadine, who passed those on to Wael Hana, who passed them on to the government of Egypt. So the senator had sent some information on embassy personnel in Egypt, and much of them Egyptians. Nadine had gotten that text message, forwarded it to Wael Hana, and then Hana sent it to the government officials in Egypt.
And Christine, in terms of some of that cash that was found, defense attorneys, correct me if I'm wrong, they were also trying to explain it away as, well, it was born out of habit because Senator Menendez watched as his parents fled Cuba, and that's what they did. They hid cash like that.
Yeah, so the one line that the defense said was, this started in Cuba. The senator's habit of hoarding cash started because his family fled Cuba before he was born. And they fled Cuba with just money they had in a grandfather clock. They said that the senator had spent all of his career saving money, withdrawing $400 to $403 a week from his savings account and just basically hoarding it away. But the prosecution said that the majority of the money that was found there, the serial numbers on the cash made him, they were not from 1996 or from 2008. They were more recent serial numbers. So,
Christine, I want to stop you just for a moment because I believe we're awaiting a press conference. We're going to send it back to Jessica Moore in studio.
All right. Thanks, Alice. Yeah, we are waiting for the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams. Here he is now. Let's listen in.
Moments ago, a jury in this courthouse convicted Senator Robert Menendez of corruption and national security offenses. This case has always been about shocking levels of corruption. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes in the form of cash, gold bars, or Mercedes-Benz. This wasn't politics as usual. This was politics for profit. And now that a jury has convicted Bob Menendez, his years of selling his office to the highest bidder have finally come to an end. I want to thank the career prosecutors and law enforcement agents and analysts who meticulously investigated and prosecuted this case. Their work is the reason why this shocking corruption has finally been unearthed and brought to an end. They are the best of the best. I'm enormously proud of them and proud to serve with them. Thank you.
Will you seek the maximum sentence, sir?
Good afternoon. I'm Christy Curtis. I'm the Acting Assistant Director of the FBI's New York Field Office. Today is a day of victory and a victory for justice. Public corruption investigations like this hold our leaders accountable and ensure they serve the public's interest and not their own. This conviction comes after careful investigation and hard work by the FBI, IRS, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The FBI's pursuit of truth and integrity was instrumental in securing this conviction. When an elected official betrays the trust placed in them, it undermines the foundation of our democracy. Thank you.
My name is Manuel Gomez, and I'm with IRS CI Criminal Investigations. I'm Assistant Special in Charge in the New York Field Office. Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you to U.S. Attorney Damian Williams for hosting us today. It is a great commitment and collaboration between IRS Criminal Investigations, the FBI, and SDNY that today's verdict was possible. I would like to recognize the work of the FBI Public Corruption C-Squad, the SDNY Public Corruption Unit, trial attorneys and paralegals for the tremendous effort in presenting this case, and the SDNY tax attorneys. I want to specifically recognize the IRS-CI special agents who worked this case in tandem with FBI special agents. Today's verdict is a reflection of all their hard work. Job well done.
Thank you, everyone.
Mr. Williams, will you seek the maximum?
And there you have it, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Damian Williams, just announcing 16 federal charges for Senator Bob Menendez, found guilty by a jury of his peers on all 16 charges. Thank you to our broadcast audience for joining us for this breaking news. Stay with us on our streaming channel, CBS News New York, for continuing coverage and for the latest updates. We'll bring those to you tonight on CBS 2 News at 5 and 6.
All right, so you've been watching the coverage of our New York partners there following that guilty verdict, that rounding guilty verdict against Senator Menendez in this corruption trial. You know, we've been seeing the what's happened relative to the criminal aspects of this, looking here at the indictment and going through all of that. But now part two is really going to be the political fallout. He is still in office. And in fact, today, there are fresh calls for him to step down. I want to show you this in real time. This is the first of what we expect will be a chorus of people sounding like Representative Andy Kim, Democrat out of New Jersey. He says this is a sad and somber day for New Jersey and our country. Our public servants should work for the people. And today we saw the people judge Senator Menendez as guilty and unfit to serve. Then underline and underscore this. I call on Senator Menendez to step down when these charges were first made public. Well, we go on to look at this, and now that he has been found guilty, I believe the only course of action for him is to resign his seat immediately. Representative Andy Kim, Democrat of New Jersey, who once worked shoulder to shoulder with this man in Congress, says the American people deserve better. All right, so let's talk about that political fallout more. Continuing the conversation, let's go to Nicole Killian. She is on Capitol Hill right now, and she's going to be talking about what the reaction is there on Capitol Hill. We have to keep in mind we're in a sensitive election season right now. A lot of Democrats wanting to hold on to power.
Yeah, absolutely, and would note that Congressman Andy Kim, who you just cited, is a candidate for U.S. Senate in the state of New Jersey. He actually challenged Senator Menendez, who ultimately, Senator Menendez, we saw, made a decision to run as an independent. But I imagine now with this guilty verdict, that could dramatically alter his candidacy. But that being said, here on Capitol Hill, we are hearing more lawmakers calling on the senator to resign, most notably Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who up until now had remained relatively tight-lipped about the senator's fate and fortune, even as many within the Senate Democratic caucus had called on him to step aside many months ago when he was initially indicted. But the Majority Leader making clear a short time ago that he does believe that the senator should resign, saying in light of this guilty verdict, Senator Menendez must now do what is right for his constituents, the Senate, and our country, and resign. We also saw a statement a short time ago from Minnesota Senator Tina Smith, who says everyone deserves due process, and that's what Senator Menendez has received. He should now resign immediately. We are also watching and awaiting potential reaction from Senator Menendez's fellow New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, who earlier today said on another broadcast program that he was watching this trial very closely and had kind of been saddened about just the whole situation, having known Senator Menendez and worked with him for the better part of a decade. But he, too, had been one of the senators who, prior to this verdict, had called on the senator to resign, something he reiterated to me a couple of weeks ago when I asked him about the senator's independent bid. So it's likely we will see more of these resignation calls to follow, but the question is if the New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez will adhere to them.
Well, it's a sensitive political time, as I said, in our country. And you know who is the megaphone right now the next few days? Republicans. This is likely something that could be echoed on the stage in Milwaukee at the Republican National Convention. Let's talk about this. If he does not resign, as you've just cited, several senators have called for him to do, is there a mechanism that he can be expelled from the Senate? We know he serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. At one point, he was even the chairman. Can they just kick him out?
Oh, well, it's certainly possible, or at minimum, perhaps he could be censured. But, I think, again, many senators have been clear in their condemnation of the senator. As I said, not long after he was indicted, nearly half of the Senate Democratic caucus called on Menendez to resign. And while the senator maintained his innocence, he did not make any moves at this time. Again, whether or not this conviction changes the calculation remains to be seen, particularly if he chooses to appeal this decision. I would also note that it could impact the balance of power here in the Senate because, as you know, there is a 51-49 advantage in the U.S. Senate, with Democrats having just that one vote majority. So if for some reason Senator Menendez did decide to resign, then that kind of takes us back to only having 50 Democratic senators on board, which could again kind of dramatically alter the situation here on Capitol Hill with respect to the balance of power. So that is something to watch going forward, because, as you know, anytime a lawmaker steps down, their seats are not necessarily filled immediately.
Well, the balance of power felt a bump today. Nicole Killian, thank you so much for that report from Capitol Hill. All right, CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson joins us now live. Okay, so at one point, the senator's defense team called this case rotten to the core. We know that you've seen all of the documents. I've got the indictment in my hand. Are you surprised by this?
I I'm not surprised because the evidence was so salacious and the evidence was right there for the jury. They could look at with their own eyes those gold bars, cash that is stacked in the senator's jackets and other clothing. And I frankly think that the prosecution told a very consistent theory of the case, which was this isn't that complicated. We have somebody who was in a position of power. He was head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he used that position of power to enrich himself and his then fiancée. And here's the evidence to show that. And so they didn't just have the after effects of the bribes, so to speak, the cash and the gold bars, but what they also had were text messages with Senator Menendez and his then fiancée and these two businessmen essentially asking for official acts in exchange for money and cars and gold. So there is a reason that the federal prosecutors decided to go through this case. I noted that not only is this the first time a U.S. senator has been convicted of serving as a foreign agent, but it's also the first time a U.S. senator has ever faced federal bribery charges twice. This is not his first rodeo.
Yeah, and really, bribery, conspiracy, extortion, and acting as a federal agent. We just heard a reporter outside that New York City courtroom saying that really, of all of the charges and convictions, was the knife in the heart to him. So, you know, his defense said that there was no evidence of quid pro quo, while at the same time, the gold bars and the cash that you mentioned. Why did that defense fall flat in the minds of jurors, do you think?
Well, I think because of the overwhelming evidence. Again, a lot of times what we see is our elected officials make a decision. Sometimes we see something like a campaign contribution or some other benefit that is received by that elected official. But it's very hard to draw a line connecting those two things. It's very hard to show what you need to show for bribery, which is a quid pro quo. In this case, it was, I think, a combination of the text messages, the overwhelming amount of gold and cash and the car. And it was, I think, the senator's decision to say, no, not it. It wasn't me.
With great respect to you and your expertise,
wife.
I have to jump in because the senator is now live and we want to bring him on the stream. Thank you so much. Let's go to the senator right now.
I never violated my public oath. I have never been anything but a patriot of my country and for my country. I have never, ever been a foreign agent. And the decision rendered by the jury today would put at risk every member of the United States Senate in terms of what they think a foreign agent would be. I'm my attorney want to say something, and then I'll keep going.
Afternoon. We were surprised and disappointed with the jury's verdict. We disagree with it, and we believe today, as we have since day one, in Bob's innocence. There are grave appellate problems with this case and with this verdict, and we're going to pursue all appellate avenues aggressively, and we do expect he will be vindicated. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have the opportunity to go back to Jessica. Jessica, I owe you a New York pizza for having to interrupt you, but we did want to let our viewers hear what the senator had to say. His attorney just saying there were grave appellate problems with this, and they will appeal. What could those be, and what kind of teeth could an appeal have, if anything?
So I think it's worth mentioning that this is what almost every convicted defendant says. It's not to take anything away from potential avenues here, but we're hard pressed to think of a defendant who says, no, that's the jury's verdict, and so I won't appeal. And I will also say that the criminal justice system really tends to favor finality. So an appellate process would not be, let's have another bite at the apple. It would have to be that there's some sort of error in the trial, like a jury instruction or evidence that was presented to the jury that should not have been there, or testimony that presented such a problem that it was not harmless error, but reversible error, so that you have to go to an appellate court and say, do something about this case. Again, I'm sure there are places where Senator Menendez will say the jury was improperly instructed or they should not have received this particular piece of evidence. But without putting my thumb too much on the scale. I will say there was a lot of evidence here. The prosecution told a solid theory of the case, and I don't think we should be holding our breath for a reversal on appeal.
Okay, so let's talk about timeline. If I'm understanding correctly, sentencing is set for October 29th. How soon would they have to file that appeal and start fighting?
So oftentimes you would wait for the sentencing and then you would file an appeal. There are situations where the trial court judge can decide to stay the sentence pending the appeal. Often that's not what happens. Often what happens is that there is a sentence, it is imposed, and the appellate process will play out while that person is, if there is incarceration, while that person is incarcerated. In this case, we know that some of the most serious charges carry up to 2 decades in prison. And so Senator Menendez could be facing significant jail time. You heard in that press conference that the Department of Justice did not respond when they said, are you going to seek the maximum? And my guess is that they don't seek the maximum because this is a first-time offense, but that there will be a request in the sentencing memorandum for significant time, because let's remember, there's a reason you and I are talking about this case. If we're talking about a senator who a jury has found abused his position of public trust for private gain, you want to not just punish the senator, but you want to make sure that you are sending a message to the rest of the country that this is not acceptable in this country.
Jessica Levinson breaking it down, making it so that we can understand this. You used the term a bite of the apple. You're helping us to really understand everything and take a bite out of this case. We appreciate you so much. Okay, so let's talk to CBS's Fin Gomez. He is right now where a lot of people could be talking about this, none other than the Republican National Convention there in Milwaukee. How will this guilty verdict really, that's a stain on the Democratic Party, and so many senators and members of Congress are echoing that. How will that now be amplified there in Milwaukee to Republican voters?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect term to use, amplified. I think we expect it to be amplified here. I did speak to a couple Republicans after this breaking news who are here, a couple delegates, and also a few other Republicans aligned with the Trump campaign. They do expect this to come up, even though the themes tonight here on day 2 of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee will be on immigration and the border and on crime. You could see that. And I've been told, because of the crime component of the theme today, that there is an expectation. They do see this as a target to hit back on the Democrats, to contrast against their policies, and they're using this incident of the New Jersey senator, of these corruption charges and bribery charges, and using it in a larger way, in a larger scope, to amplify what they say is the difference between what they're proposing as a party in contrasting against the Democrats.
We know that you are there where the drumbeat to the presidency is happening. I have to think of the converse. We know that President Joe Biden is in Las Vegas today speaking to members of the NAACP. Do you have, in your political expertise, any expectation that we will hear from the president on this?
We have not. I have not spoken to the Biden campaign about this specifically. I do think at some point they will have to address this. I think at some point they will have to do that. So remember, Senator Menendez, before this trial, before these charges, was a very highly regarded senator, senior senator, with a lot of political expertise. So I think the expectation is that there will be some. He will be asked for sure by the White House press corps traveling with him. We did see that Senator Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, already put out a statement saying that asking for Senator Menendez to do what's right for his constituents, the Senate, and our country, and resign. So I would expect that we would hear a similar sort of statement from the president or senior advisors to the president today or in the coming days.
All right, Fin Gomez, thank you for that. We want to go back to Nicole Killion on Capitol Hill.
Thank you.
Nicole, we just were able to hear from the senator himself and his attorneys. They continue to insist that he is innocent. We also have to keep in mind that the senator wants to keep his seat running as an independent.
Well, look, we did just kind of piggyback on what Finn was saying, continue to see more calls on the senator to resign. The latest one coming from Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar, who is also part of the Rules Committee here in the Senate. And this is on top of not only Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, also Congressman Andy Kim of New Jersey, who is actually running for the Democratic nomination for the Senate seat in New Jersey. He was one of the first to challenge Senator Bob Menendez shortly after this indictment came forth last fall. But that being said, look, in terms of what the senator may do next, he, as you said, continued to maintain his innocence and said very clearly that I have never been a foreign agent, that he would put at risk anyone in the U.S. Senate if he were to have been one, although that is one of the charges that he was convicted of today. So again, we know that the senator has very staunchly defended himself through this trial, but even those defenses don't seem to be resonating with his colleagues today, who are very vociferously calling on him to step down.
Are you seeing the same colleagues who called for him to at least at a minimum move off of that committee, that chair assignment? Are you seeing any congruency between the people who spoke out originally and now, or are you seeing more now get on board?
Well, again, I mean, keep in mind this verdict was just reached within the last hour or so. So, I mean, it will take some time, I think, for more fulsome reaction to come forward. But as we have previously noted in this program, prior to this verdict coming down, more than half of the Senate Democratic caucus had called on the senator to resign and had really put some distance there. Although, that being said, and even though the senator stepped off of his duties as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he continued to take part, for instance, in classified briefings. That was a concern that many of his colleagues had here on the Hill. But again, the senator defended his right to continue to carry out his duties and serve his constituency as a member of this body. But again, not sure that that will continue to fly with his colleagues now that he has been found guilty on all counts.
Well, we hear that phrase all the time, guilt by association. You have to wonder if that is not top of mind as we look at the balance of power, as we look at Democrats who want to hang on to as many seats as they can keep hold of and try to get more seats during this very sensitive political time. Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill, thank you so much for your analysis and reaction. Okay, let's go back in time just a minute ago. That senator stepped before the cameras outside of that New York courtroom. We wanted to let you hear the full body of what he had to say. Listen.
Good afternoon. Obviously, I'm deeply, deeply disappointed by the jury's decision. I have every faith that the law and the facts did not sustain that decision and that we will be successful upon appeal. I have never violated my public oath. I have never been anything but a patriot of my country and for my country. I have never, ever been a foreign agent, and the decision rendered by the jury today would put at risk every member of the United States Senate in terms of what they think a foreign agent would be. My attorney want to say something?
Afternoon. We were surprised and disappointed with the jury's verdict. We disagree with it, and we believe today, as we have since day one, in Bob's innocence. There are grave appellate problems with this case and with this verdict, and we're going to pursue all appellate avenues aggressively, and we do expect he will be vindicated. Thank you.
All right, so we were just talking to Nicole Killian on Capitol Hill. She had mentioned a growing chorus of leaders in Washington calling for the senator, now that he's been found guilty, to resign, not the least of which Senator Amy Klobuchar. But now we're starting to hear from others. This is a statement from New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy there on your screen. It's a little bit difficult to read, but he says, in part, today's verdict finding Senator Bob Menendez guilty on 16 counts demonstrates that the senator broke the law, violated the trust of his constituents, and betrayed his oath of office. It also shows that in America, everyone, no matter how powerful, is accountable to our laws. He goes on to say that the senator received a fair trial and due process. And then look at that last paragraph here. He says, I reiterate my call for Senator Menendez to resign immediately. and being found guilty of endangering national security and the integrity of our criminal justice system. Also out of New Jersey, this statement we are seeing from a member of Congress here. This is from Representative Andy Kim, Democrat out of New Jersey. This is a sad and somber day for New Jersey and our country. Our public servants should work for the people. And today we saw the people judge Senator Menendez as guilty and unfit to serve. And again, that same line you're seeing now over and over. I call on Senator Menendez to step down. Now that he's been found guilty, I believe the only course of action for him is to resign his seat immediately. He goes on to say the people of New Jersey deserve better. So just two reactions in just 2 minutes that we've been able to bring you, and certainly more as our correspondents on Capitol Hill have been able to bring. Once again, we're watching the fallout of this guilty verdict in the corruption case against Senator Menendez. We'll also be covering the reaction from Milwaukee and Wisconsin. That's it for us. CBS News 24/7.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something